What if everything you built, with needle, silence, and grit, could be undone by a single smile from someone who once left him behind? If you've ever stood tall in a world that wanted you small, if you've ever had to defend your worth without raising your voice, this story will stay with you. Because some storms wear velvet, and this one came to reclaim what was no longer hers. The morning sun hit Silver Creek like it always did. Low, golden, soft against frostbitten windows. Inside the back room of the boarding house, Ella Lanina Morgan sat by her sewing machine, hands moving in rhythm, eyes calm, breath steady. Since the church social and Gabriel's recovery, things had settled into something that felt dangerously close to peace. Orders came in faster than she could finish them. Martha Webb often joked, "You'll need apprentices soon, girl." And truth be told, Ella had thought about it. She was no longer just the tall woman from out east. She was Miss Morgan, the seamstress who stitched uniforms for the loggers, hemmed dresses for church ladies, and never turned down a widow in need of a winter coat. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was getting there. That was the day the letter came. Martha brought it in, still dusted with snow, wax sealed and smelling faintly of rose oil. Ella raised an eyebrow. "That yours?" she asked Martha. "Nope," the older woman said, placing it on the table beside Ella's scissors. "Came addressed to Mr. Blackwood." Gabriel was due by noon, something about checking timber loads and finalizing new safety gear. When he arrived, boots heavy with snow and a pine branch caught in his scarf, Ella held out the letter with a curious smile. "Fancy," she said. "You hiding a secret admirer?" Gabriel's face shifted, just enough for Ella to notice. Not alarm, not delight, something in between. He took the letter slowly, studied the seal, and didn't open it. "Old contact," he muttered, stuffing it into his coat. "I'll read it later." She didn't push. She learned not to. Gabriel Blackwood was steady as an oak, but even oaks had knots in their bark. Later that evening, after supper and quiet talk in the parlor, Gabriel excused himself early. "Early camp run tomorrow," he said. "Need to rest." He left the room, but not before Ella saw the letter still clutched in his hand. The next day passed without him. Unusual, but not alarming. He'd vanished for longer. Still, something tugged at her all day. Something in his face, in the way he hadn't said goodbye. By the third day, she knew something was off. She caught Martha watching her from the kitchen doorway. "You ever feel the wind change before the clouds roll in?" Martha asked. Ella looked up. "Always." Martha nodded. "Might be time to brace yourself then." On the fourth day, Gabriel returned. His usual calm was intact, but the kind that felt like a man walking across thin ice. Over coffee, Ella finally asked, "Are you going to tell me who the letter was from, or do I have to sew it into the next pair of trousers just to find out?" Gabriel winced, then chuckled. "You deserve to know," he said softly. He pulled the folded letter from his coat pocket like it had weight to it. "Her name's Margot Hensley. We were engaged. Years ago." Ella sat back, steadying her voice. "You were going to marry her?" "I almost did." Boston girl. Old family money. Her father made it clear I wasn't polished enough for the Hensleys. Ella nodded slowly. "So what's she want now?" "She says her family's investing in western towns, looking to expand, build, and she's chosen Silver Creek. She's arriving next week." The sewing machine was still running in the background, its soft hum the only sound between them. Ella looked down at her hands. "Does she know you're not available?" Gabriel held her gaze. "She'll know." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, light and silent. But inside Ella's chest, something stirred. Not jealousy, not yet, but a sense that maybe, just maybe, her fight wasn't over. Not even close. The stagecoach rattled into Silver Creek just before noon on a Thursday, wheels crunching through the slush-coated street as heads turned all across town. Snow still clung to the rooftops, but even the cold wind seemed to pause. Like it, too, was curious. Ella Lanina Morgan stood inside the general store, waiting on a shipment of thread and coat buttons when she saw it. Not just the coach, but the woman stepping down from it. She wore a navy velvet coat with mother-of-pearl buttons that gleamed in the light, a feathered hat tilted just so. Her boots left no sound on the wooden walk. She moved like someone who'd never stumbled, never rushed, never been made to wait for anything. Was she here to open a shop, reclaim a man, or remind the town how admiration always costs less than respect? Margot Hensley had arrived. Ella didn't move, but her hands curled around the bolt of fabric in her arms, holding it like armor. She watched as Margot surveyed the town square, not with disdain, but with calculated interest. Her eyes were sharp, measuring, and then they landed on the boarding house across the way. Margot tilted her head slightly, as if already imagining how she might reframe it in lace curtains and polished brass fixtures. Some folks bring the storm with them, Martha Webb muttered beside her, having appeared silently like smoke from a kitchen fire. She's one of those. Ella no respondió, but she felt it, somewhere behind her ribs. That evening, Gabriel arrived later than usual. His coat was dusted with snow, and he looked like he'd walked most of the way instead of riding. "She's here," he said. "I saw." "She asked about me." "I'm sure she did." He hesitated, then took a slow breath. "Ella, I don't want this to get in the way of what we've built." She looked up from the hem she was pinning. "Then make sure it doesn't." He didn't stay long. The next morning, Ella passed the mayor's office and saw Margot inside, seated comfortably as if she already belonged there. The morning after that, she toured the old livery barn near the town square. By the third day, it was official. Margot Hensley was opening a fashion boutique, Silver Creek's very first, and she'd chosen the space directly across from Ella's sewing room window. The town gathered to hear her speak, Prescott at her side, naturally. She smiled as she outlined her plans for luxury fabrics, imported lace, seasonal collections. Women listened with sparkling eyes. Some clapped. A few already whispered her name like a promise. Ella stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands still. She said nothing. But when Margot glanced up and met her gaze across the square, she didn't blink, didn't smile, just measured. That night, on the boarding house porch, Martha sat beside Ella, knitting slow and steady. "You could match her," she said, "stitch for stitch, charm for charm." "I don't want to match her," Ella replied. "I want to matter in a different way." "Good," Martha said, her needles pausing, "because if you start playing her game, she's already won." 2 mornings later, Margot knocked on the boarding house door. She wore a winter white cape and matching gloves. Her voice was pleasant as she asked, "Might I speak with Miss Morgan?" Ella led her to the parlor, offered tea. Margot declined. "I admire your work," she began, folding her gloves delicately. "The townsfolk speak highly of you." "That's kind of them." "I imagine it took determination to earn their trust." "It did, and honesty." Margot tilted her head. "Gabriel always did value honesty, though I suppose it's easier to be honest once you've forgotten the past." Ella's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. "If you came here to measure me, Miss Hensley, I hope you've taken your notes." Margot's lips curved slightly. "Oh, I don't measure. I observe. But observation reveals plenty." She stood. "You have a rare presence, Miss Morgan, but presence isn't permanence, not in towns like these." Ella rose, taller by inches and anchored like granite. "Permanence is built, and not everyone's a builder." Margot's smile flickered, just for a second. "Then you're lucky. Silver Creek already has one." With that, she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. Ella no se movió durante un tiempo. Her heart beat steady, but her hands trembled. Not from fear, from fire. That evening, Gabriel came. "I heard she came by," he said. "She did." "She say much?" "Not with her mouth." He stepped forward, reached gently for her hand. She pulled it back, not with anger, but with caution. "I just need a little space," she said. He nodded. "I'll wait." After he left, Ella returned to her sewing table. The light from the oil lamp flickered across the room. Her needle hovered over fabric for a long moment. Then she picked it up and stitched. Because storms didn't always howl or rage. Sometimes they came dressed in silk. It started with whispers. Not the loud, obvious kind. No, these were quieter, more insidious. The kind that stitched doubt into the seams of your day without you noticing at first. A woman looking away too quickly in the general store. A customer who used to linger now, rushing out with barely a nod. A conversation that paused the second Ella stepped into the church vestibule. One morning, Mrs. Barrow, who once wept with gratitude when Ella repaired her son's only winter coat, crossed the street rather than meet her eyes. By the end of the week, the sewing room was quieter than it had been in months. Across the square, the sound of hammers and saws rang out as Margot Hensley's boutique began taking shape. Not a modest shop like Ella's, but a statement. Big glass windows, polished brass handles, fresh white paint. A banner hung from the awning. Maison Hensley, coming soon. Ella tried not to watch. She tried to focus on her own work. Needle in, needle out, thread pulled just tight enough to hold, but it was hard to ignore the shadow stretching across her window. It got harder when Ruthie Lang, a longtime customer, stopped by only to awkwardly mention she'd already picked something up from Miss Hensley's shop, just for a special occasion. You know how it is. Ella Sanrio. Of course. Was she being replaced, forgotten, or just quietly unchosen by the same hands she'd once stitched hope into? But that night, she pricked her finger on the needle for the first time in weeks. Gabriel came by late that evening, coat damp with snow, boots heavy on the porch. You okay? He asked, watching her rub the sore spot on her thumb. She's taking customers, Ella replied, not looking up. He frowned. Margot? She's not even open yet, and still they're going to her. Ruthie Lang said she wanted something a little more refined. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, silent for a moment. You've never stitched to compete. I've never had to. A beat passed. She's not doing this to get to you. Ella looked up sharply. Isn't she? He hesitated. She's here for business. She's here for you. That landed like a hammer between them. Gabriel walked over, pulled up a chair. You want to know the truth? He said quietly. Margot was the first woman I ever thought I could build something with. Back in Boston, I thought we were on the same page. But she wanted a man who knew how to shine boots, not scuff them. When her father offered me a deal, marry her, manage their holdings, I realized I'd be marrying into something, not with someone. So I walked. Ella listened, but didn't soften. And now, she asked? She's not here for love. She's here because I became someone without her. That's a bruise certain people can't ignore. And you waited this long to tell me why? I didn't want her shadow falling between us. It already has. The following week, the town council announced a new vote, a tax relief plan for businesses that modernize Silver Creek's image. The proposal was Margot's, of course, and her boutique was its flagship. Ella didn't plan to attend the town meeting. She didn't want to see Margot standing at the front of the room like she owned it. She didn't want to hear the subtle applause or the way people leaned in when Margot spoke. But Martha Webb had other ideas. You're coming, she said, folding her arms across her chest. And you're wearing that burgundy dress with the copper embroidery. Ella raised an eyebrow. Why? Because they need reminding, Martha said. Reminding that you didn't arrive here with silk and sugar. You arrived with grit and thread and heart. That still counts. So Ella went. The meeting was held in the town hall, candles flickering against old stone. Margot stood at the front, poised and elegant, talking about commerce, reputation, vision. She even used the word heritage. When she said, Silver Creek deserves to be more than a footnote in the logging trail, half the room nodded. And when she added, with the right businesses, the right faces, we can become a destination. Her eyes drifted toward Ella, just for a second. After the meeting in the foyer, William Prescott found her. Funny thing, he said, sipping from a crystal glass. For a while I thought you were turning into the heart of this town. Ella no respondio. He leaned in. But hearts can be replaced, especially when something shinier comes along. She met his gaze, unmoved. Shiny things rust. What I build doesn't. He smirked, but it faltered. Gabriel stood nearby, watching the exchange, but didn't intervene. And that's what unsettled her most. That night, Ella stitched late into the dark. No customer orders, no deadlines, just fabric, thread, and breath. A coat lining she'd promised herself she'd fix months ago. A hem that didn't need fixing, but gave her something steady to hold. Every stitch whispered the same thing. You've been here before. You've fought harder storms. You didn't come this far to be unraveled. The snow fell heavier that week, clinging to windows like questions no one wanted to answer. The air inside the boarding house stayed warm, thanks to Martha's unrelenting stew pot and Ella's steady fire. But between her and Gabriel, something had cooled. He came by less often. When he did, his stories were shorter. His eyes lingered on the floorboards more than her face. Margot's boutique now had gas lamps at the entrance, imported curtains in the windows, a brass bell above the door that jingled every time a new admirer stepped through. Ella didn't look, not at the storefront, not at the people going in, but she heard, and that was worse. One afternoon, while hemming a heavy canvas coat, she pricked her finger again, second time in 3 days. She stared at the tiny bloom of red on her skin and muttered, "That's enough." Gabriel arrived that evening, earlier than usual, with something like guilt in his hands. "I've been off," he admitted. Ella no respondio. She poured him coffee, set it on the table, then returned to her stitching. "She's been asking questions," he continued, "about us. Have you answered?" "Not the ones she really means." Ella's hands paused. "I didn't tell her how we met," Gabriel said. "Didn't tell her how I felt the moment I saw you on that platform. How you stood taller than everyone and didn't apologize for it." She looked at him now, needle still in hand. "I didn't tell her how I watched you take rejection and turn it into a trade, into a place, into a damn anchor in this town. How you sat beside me when I couldn't breathe without pain and never once looked away." He took a breath. "And I didn't tell her she's too late." Ella set the coat down slowly. "Why didn't you?" Gabriel looked tired. "Because part of me didn't want to explain it. I just wanted her to see it." "She won't," Ella said, "because women like Margot don't look to see. They look to compare." He nodded. "And I should have said it anyway." 2 days later, Ella walked by Maison Hensley. She hadn't planned to. She told herself she was delivering buttons to the general store, but her feet took the long way. The boutique's doors were open. Light spilled onto the walk. Inside, Margot stood before a crowd of women holding fabric swatches like gemstones. She saw Ella. She smiled, and then she raised her voice. "We're pleased to announce a spring gala, right here in Silver Creek. New dresses, fresh colors, a new season for a new town." Ella walked faster. That night, Gabriel didn't come by. The following morning, he did. He looked different, not ashamed, resolved. "I told her," he said. "Ella no pregunt okay." He sat. "Told her I'm with you, that we're building something real, that her boutique can grow all it wants, but it won't rewrite what we have. Words are fine, but is love ever made of words? Or is it made of time, choice, and showing up when it's hardest?" Ella sat across from him. "I wish it didn't take this long," she said softly. "So do I," he admitted. "But I'm here now, all of me." She reached out, fingers brushing his. "Then start acting like it." He squeezed her hand gently. "There's a town council event next week. You and me, together?" She smiled, small but sincere. "Only if I get to pick your cravat." "Deal." Later that week, a delivery arrived at Ella's sewing room. A wrapped box with a blue ribbon. Inside was a dress form. Vintage. Handmade. A note attached in Gabriel's handwriting. "For your next chapter. Make it yours." Gee, she stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the snow fall, ribbon still in her hand. Because love wasn't always spoken loud, but it was felt in what he didn't say before, and finally in what he did now. The morning of the council presentation arrived with the kind of chill that felt personal, sharp, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Ella rose before dawn, boiled water for coffee, and stood by the window as Silver Creek stretched itself awake beneath a sky the color of forged iron. Across the square, Maison Hensley was already lit. Of course it was. Inside the boarding house, Martha Webb was pinning a ribbon in her hair. "You're still planning on going, right?" she asked without looking up. Ella assentio. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good, because silence is its own kind of surrender." By mid-morning, the town hall buzzed with quiet anticipation. Every bench was filled. Store clerks, school teachers, ranch wives, and rough-palmed men in Sunday shirts. Even the pastor was there, seated near the back with his Bible closed and unread. At the front of the room stood a presentation board lined with color renderings and investment charts. Margot Hensley took the floor, dressed in soft rose silk, her voice syrup smooth. She spoke of revitalization, of foot traffic, of attracting buyers from down the line. Silver Creek is a place with untapped beauty, she said, letting her eyes drift deliberately across the room. But it needs polish, structure, a new face. A low murmur stirred. Not disagreement, curiosity. She turned, graceful as a dancer, and gestured toward a series of maps. The proposed expansion includes boutique lanes, a hotel annex, and an events plaza. Yes, some buildings will be repurposed, but that's the price of progress. Ella's ears rang, because one of the buildings circled in red ink, marked for transition, was hers. Her sewing room. The silence afterward stretched too long. Then Gabriel stood. "I have a question," he said, voice calm but firm. "Who decides what gets erased in the name of progress?" Margot smiled, soft and sharp. "Nothing is erased. It's all transformed." Gabriel nodded. "Funny. That's what they said when they tore down my grandfather's homestead to build a banker's office." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. Then Martha Webb stood, and then unexpectedly, so did Ella. The room shifted. All eyes turned. She walked to the front slowly, the floor creaking beneath each deliberate step. "I came to this town with nothing," she began. "Not a name anyone knew, not a family anyone claimed, just thread, fabric, and a pair of hands." She turned to face them. "And I made something. Not just dresses, not just mended shirts. I made trust. I made roots. And now I hear my little sewing room is in the way." She paused, voice steady. "Progress is fine, but it shouldn't come at the cost of the people who held this town together when no one else would. If you tear down what's real to build something prettier, all you're left with is hollow shine. So what kind of future are we voting for? One with polish or one with roots?" She stepped back, and the room was silent. Then someone clapped. Slow, then another, then more. Margot's face didn't flinch, but her hand, resting on the table, curled just slightly. That night, Ella sat at her sewing table, candlelight flickering on unfinished work. Gabriel came in quietly, holding a folded piece of paper. "The vote's in," he said. She didn't ask. She waited. The council rejected the proposal, unanimously. Ella cerró los ojos por un momento. Not from relief, from weight leaving her shoulders. "She'll stay," Gabriel added. "She said she's not going anywhere." Ella looked at him. "And you?" "I'm not going anywhere either." He stepped closer, set the paper down. "I meant what I said. I'm with you. I'll fight beside you, even if it's in silence. Especially then." Ella nodded, eyes soft. But before she could speak, a loud crack echoed from outside. Then shouts. Then smoke. Gabriel ran to the door. Ella was right behind him. Across the square. Maison Hensley was burning. Flames curled against the night sky like ribbons of fury, red and gold licking at the edges of everything Margot Hensley had built. Maison Hensley burned fast. Too fast. Ella stood in the cold, her breath visible, heart pounding. People poured into the square. Buckets, shouts, panic. Gabriel ran toward the fire without hesitation, grabbing a pail from the pump and shouting for others to form a line. Martha moved toward the boarding house, ushering children inside away from sparks riding the wind. Margot stood frozen at the edge of the square, silk nightrobe flapping in the wind, eyes wide and unblinking. Ella moved without thinking. She crossed the square, reached Margot's side and gripped her wrist. "We need to move," she said, voice clear. Margot didn't resist, just stared at the blaze like it was some divine punishment she hadn't seen coming. They backed away together as the flames devoured lace curtains and polished wood. The glass shattered like the end of a dream. By the time the bucket line slowed, the boutique was a blackened frame, smoke bleeding into the stars. No lives lost, but a symbol was gone. The next morning, Gabriel found Ella in her sewing room, pinning fabric to the dress form he'd gifted her. "You didn't sleep," he said. She shook her head. He watched her for a long time before speaking. "They think it was the chimney. Bad flu. But some folks, they're saying other things. Ella looked at him. You mean Prescott? He nodded. He's been stirring mud since the vote didn't go his way. You'd think losing power would quiet a man, but some men only know how to whisper behind fire. She pressed a seam flat with the side of her hand. Let him talk. Gabriel stepped closer. What you did, pulling her from that square, standing beside her, while everything she clung to turned to ash, that mattered. She would have done the same. No, Ella, she wouldn't have. That's the difference. Margot didn't leave town. Not right away. For days, she stayed in a small room above the old newspaper office, hair tied back, eyes tired. She didn't smile. She didn't ask for help. But she didn't fight when it was offered. One afternoon, she came to the boarding house unannounced. Ella abrió la puerta y encontró a ella sosteniendo un solo trozo de papel doblado. I won't rebuild, Margot said without preamble. Not here. Ella stepped aside. Let her in. I came west thinking I was chasing a new kind of empire, Margot continued, sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch. What I found was that I never learned how to stand still. Never learned how to let anything grow. You did. Ella no interrumpio. Margot set the paper on the table. That's the deed to the boutique plot. I'm signing it over. You do what you want with it. Build something lasting. Ella blinked. Why? Because for the first time, I envy someone who earned what I've always demanded. She stood to leave, paused at the door. Tell Gabriel I never hated him, she said. I just hated who I couldn't become. Then she left and didn't look back. Weeks passed. Spring crept in slowly. Melting snow, blooming crocuses near the chapel fence. The town softened again, reshaped by trial, by fire, by choice. Ella turned the charred boutique frame into a garden. First, a place for flowers and benches, for women to gather, mend, talk, dream. Then behind it, she and Gabriel built something else. Stitch and root, a sewing house, a trade shop, a place for apprentices, for stories passed down between stitches, for girls who stood tall and didn't shrink to fit. Gabriel carved the sign by hand. On opening day, the town came. Not all, but enough. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves, men tipped their hats. Even Ruthie Lang brought pie. Ella stood on the porch in her copper-trimmed burgundy dress, Gabriel beside her. Still nervous? He asked. No, she said. Not anymore. He smiled. You're not just seen now. You're known. She nodded. And not just as the tall woman. No, he agreed. As the one who stayed. The one who built tall, tough, tender. She had been all three, and finally she didn't have to apologize for any of it. They stood there a while watching the townsfolk file in. The sun touched everything gold. And for the first time, truly, Ella Lanina Morgan didn't feel like she was borrowing space in the world. She had claimed it, thread by thread, word by word, choice by choice. She had made it hers.